In the tranquil and idyllic region of Victoria, Australia, which has long been renowned for its peace and quality of life, a shocking act of violence shattered the tranquility on March 18, 1992. Geelong West, a part of Victoria, boasts a harmonious blend of residential and commercial areas, offering convenience and comfort to families and professionals while being in close proximity to stunning beaches and major cities. It is an area that prioritizes relaxation and well-being. However, the serenity of this neighborhood was disrupted when a heinous crime occurred, targeting 29-year-old Annette Stewart within the confines of her home on Hope Street. Annette Stewart, born in March 1962 to Roy and Margaret Stewart, was a woman who had built a life for herself. She had 2 children, a 10-year-old son named Aaron and a 13-year-old daughter named Jacinta. Tragically, these children were left alone when their mother's life was brutally taken from her. Annette was employed at the Winchester Ammunition Factory in Point Henry, but little information about her personal life was available to the public. To her children, Jacinta remembered her as a loving and ever-present mother. Annette had a vibrant personality and a wide circle of friends who cherished her deeply. She was brimming with energy and positivity, making her sudden and untimely demise all the more devastating. Just 2 weeks before her 30th birthday, on March 17, 1992, Annette concluded her workday at approximately 4 p.m. She then went shopping in Geelong with 4 male friends, creating pleasant memories with them. After returning home, they enjoyed a leisurely tea together. However, it was after her friends departed that Annette found herself alone in her house on that fateful day of March 18th. The following day, a friend who had been Annette's former flatmate stopped by. Seeing her car parked outside, he entered the house with the intention of meeting her. Little did he anticipate the horrors he would encounter within those walls. Instead of a warm reunion with his friend, he discovered Annette's lifeless and unclothed body. A cruel electrical cord cruelly tightened around her neck. He immediately alerted the authorities, setting in motion a thorough police investigation. An autopsy of Annette's body revealed that she had suffered head injuries and had been strangled in a horrific and brutal manner, making strangulation the cause of her death. During the initial stages of the investigation, the police faced a dearth of leads, and the case eventually went cold. It wasn't until 15 years later, in 2007, that a coroner named Ian West identified Annette's co-worker, Craig Cameron Rogers, as the primary suspect. Rogers had remained a person of interest throughout the investigation due to the accounts he had provided to the police. Annette's sister, Gillian Stewart, expressed her relief at the discovery and noted that it aligned with their expectations. However, no charges were filed against anyone at that time, and the police continued to explore potential suspects and leads without success. In a desperate bid to unearth a substantial lead, the Victoria Police Department offered a reward of $1 million to anyone who could provide pertinent information regarding the case. This reward offer came in January 2020, and it led to a significant breakthrough. Detectives from Victoria and Western Australia began to connect dots between murder cases, and they ultimately arrested a 52-year-old man named Darren John Chalmers in Perth's Wembley area. Chalmers emerged as a prime suspect in the disappearance and subsequent murder of a 59-year-old woman named Diane Barrett in Medina. Chalmers, when confronted, admitted to his guilt in the case of Diane Barrett. He disclosed that after having a meal at Diane's place, which was his neighbor, he lured her to his house for tea and then brutally attacked her. He injected her with methamphetamine, strangled her with his hands in a metal bar, and inexplicably discarded her lifeless body in a remote brushland. Chillingly, when he watched news coverage of the case on television with a friend, he casually remarked, "Yeah, it's a bit of a mystery, isn't it?" Detectives seized this opportunity to inquire about Annette Stewart, and the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. While the police did not immediately press charges related to Annette's murder, they issued a strong statement to the media. They declared that they were no longer actively seeking other suspects, and that the investigation would center around their interactions with Chalmers. The authorities were confident that they had finally identified Annette's killer. Subsequently, after transporting Chalmers from Perth to Victoria, he was officially charged with the murder of Annette Stewart in March 2023. As Chalmers' case unfolded, many aspects of his troubled life were brought to light. Born and raised in Victoria, he had been a ward of the state since his teenage years. Throughout his life, Chalmers had endured abuse at the hands of both men and women, which had fueled his growing rage, particularly towards women. His history was marred by violent outbursts, often exacerbated by drug use, especially methamphetamine. In the case of Diane Barrett, he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 2040, marking the end of one gruesome chapter in his life. Following an extensive investigation, during which investigators became increasingly certain of Chalmers' involvement in Annette's death, he was placed in custody pending his appearance at the Melbourne Magistrates Court on March 20th. During this appearance conducted via video link, Chalmers could be seen wearing glasses and prison attire. He was not required to enter a plea at this stage, with his next court date set for June 13, 2023, when he is expected to face trial. The exact motive behind Annette's murder remains unconfirmed, but it is a tragic event that robbed the world of a joyful life and a cherished individual. In conclusion, the peaceful and livable community of Geelong West, Victoria, was forever changed by the violent crime that took place on March 18, 1992. Annette Stewart's life was tragically cut short, leaving behind 2 grieving children and a community in shock. The path to justice was long and complex, involving years of investigation and the eventual arrest of Darren John Chalmers. While his trial is yet to take place, the hope remains that Annette's family and friends may finally find closure and the answers they seek regarding her untimely death. 22-year-old Kyle Clinkscales lived in El Range. In 1976, the sports-obsessed young man was attending Auburn University in Alabama. At the university, he was beginning to search for his place in the world and map out what career to pursue. On January 27, 1976, Kyle left his part-time job at a bar in Lorange and headed out for the roughly 45-minute drive to Auburn University, where he was a sophomore. Kyle never made it to the university when his parents could not get in contact with him. He was reported missing, and nothing out of the ordinary was found at Kyle's apartment to suggest that he ran away or had moved elsewhere. Investigators believed that something happened at some point on his trip. They just did not know what it could be. The county sheriff's office and Kyle's parents intensively searched for him in those initial weeks after he went missing. Lakes were drained and rewards were promised. Deputies searched woodlands for a single clue for Kyle's parents, John and Louise Clinkscales. The effort was a passionate, all-consuming quest, mirroring scores of other missing person cases across the country, with loved ones pleading for tips. Searchers growing wearier with each unsuccessful venture, and members of an exhausted community looking on aghast that something so haunting could have happened to one of their own. The determination was the source of admiration for many. Kyle Clinkscales had always liked New Orleans, so his parents bought ads in the city asking for help to find their son. He had loved Hawaii when he visited on some vacation as a boy, so his parents sent letters to every police department in the state. When tips came in that a person had been found matching his description of a strong jaw, shaggy brown hair, thick eyebrows, they drove to the places where those tips originated 2 years after their son's disappearance. The Clinkscales had distributed nearly 5,000 bumper stickers seeking information. They became supporters for families of others who had missing relatives and tried to call attention to cases not as well publicized. The Clinkscales were among those invited to the White House in 1985 to meet with President Ronald Reagan about ways to address the issue of missing and exploited children in their home, the same one where Kyle Clinkscales had been raised, and that was decorated with pictures of him, smiling in and wearing a bow tie. His parents' drive to find their son would sometimes give way to fatigue. In an interview in 1978, John Clinkscales expressed unease. Maybe he said his son, who did not really like college, felt like he was a financial burden on his parents. Instead of dropping out or sharing his feelings, he might just have wanted to make it easier on us by disappearing. Every time Louise and John Clink Scales left their home in LaRange, Georgia to search for him, one of them would leave behind a note if their son returned while they were gone. They wanted him to know that a lot had changed since he was last seen in 1976. They loved him, so the Clink Scales would write, and there on the dining room table was a spare car key for him. Both John and Louise Clink Scales submitted their DNA samples to investigators for testing in case their son's remains were ever found. Sadly, John Clink Scales passed away in 2007. Louise passed away in January 2021 at the age of 92. A driver in Seta, Alabama, about 30 miles southwest of LaRange, was on a two-lane road on December 7, 2021, when he saw the hatchback of a rusted vehicle sticking out of the creek and called the authorities. It was a 1974 Ford Pinto poking out from the creek. There were human remains inside the rusty car and about 50 skeletal fragments encased in the mud. It was not clear what allowed the car to become visible from the road after all this. In February 2023, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation confirmed that the remains belonged to Kyle Clink Scales. The creek where the car was found in Chambers County, Alabama, outside of LaRange, was never searched because the road would not likely have been Kyle's main route to Auburn, though it might have been an alternate one. Aaron Hackley, the coroner in Troup County, Georgia, said that it might take investigators months to determine the exact cause, if they can pinpoint one at all given the age of the remains. M. Hackley said when she got the call from investigators that the remains had been identified. She called Kyle's Aunt Martha Morrison, who responded with relief and regret that his parents were not alive to hear the news. Patricia Chuka Bender gave birth to her only child, Susan Robin Bender, on November 27, 1970, in Modesto, California. She passed away on April 25, 1986. At 15, Susan left her family's house to spend the weekend with friends in Carmel by the sea. To get to the Greyhound bus station at 10th and G Street, she strolled. Susan ran into friends while she was waiting for the bus. She informed them of her coastal excursion and her intention to return in a few days. After their conversation was over, Susan made a call at the depot payphone. A full-sized olive green 1977 Ford van arrived 10 or so minutes later. Susan entered the car. Susan was last observed at this location. In the 1980s, it was not unheard of for a 15-year-old to have so much freedom. Bender, Pat. When Susan didn't return her usual phone call to her mother, she assumed that her daughter had arrived safely in Carmel and was enjoying herself with her friends. On May 1, 1986, her mother reported her daughter missing, which worried her. Investigators quickly concluded that a horrible thing had occurred to Susan. A detective revealed to the neighborhood publication, "There is concrete evidence that suggests Susan Bender's disappearance was the result of foul play." The same newspaper was informed by Susan's mother that although Susan had fled home twice previously, she had always returned rather quickly. She claimed that before she vanished, things had been going well between us, and that she had shown no signs of planning to flee. She said that Susan's phone book, clothes, and diary had been discovered in the possession of an unidentified male person of interest. His ownership. Pat went on, "I fear a man who the police questioned, but never arrested, attacked her. Despite having a lot of circumstantial evidence against him, they chose not to arrest him. The police always believed Susan was not missing her own voice." Detective Richard Ryow, who was assigned to the case until his retirement in 2000, told a newspaper in 1987 that he thought Susan was most likely not alive anymore in 1999. Susan's mother said in an interview that the police said there is little they can do without a body detective. Commented in that same year, "Susan Bender just fell off the face of the earth." What is really strange about this case is that nothing has ever come up about her in all these years, and no one has ever come forward with any information about what happened to her. Also in 1999, Lauren Herzog and Wesley Shermantine, two childhood friends from Linden, California, targeted young women in and around the nearby Stockton area. There was some speculation that perhaps Susan was one of their victims. Many of their victims have never been identified. Authorities did not know if the men had anything to do with Susan's abduction, but it is possible, as she vanished in the time that they were busy with their evil deeds. Susan's disappearance fit their modus operandi for victims, but despite years of investigation into Herzog and Sherman Tynes' crimes, there had never been a link to Susan's case. They went on a spree in the 1980s and 1990s, taking the lives of several females, and may have had more than 15 victims in the meantime. Remained unsolved for nearly 4 decades, investigators spoke to family and friends who fought to keep Susan's story alive. Sandy Silveria, a friend of Susan, commented in 2021, "Where is she? What happened to her? Whoever did this, they have to be held accountable." In October 2021, the Modesto Police Department announced that they reopened the case in the hopes of finally locating the long-lost teenager. The department said in a statement that in reviewing this case, "We identified potential areas of opportunity that may assist in moving this case forward. This includes the use of advancements in technology. Given the circumstances of the crime, we also believe there may be individuals previously unidentified who may have pertinent information surrounding Susan's disappearance." Modesto's cold case investigators were hoping that the many years since Susan's disappearance had increased witnesses' willingness to speak out. The police department said in a statement in 2022 that it is important to remember that Susan was a child with a family. Unfortunately, that family has gone 36 years without closure or justice. It is our job as an agency to assist in providing some level of closure, with the ultimate goal of getting justice. Then, on Thursday, August 17, 2023, the Modesto Police Department announced the arrest of Raymond Lewis Stafford, who is 76 years old. Stafford was arrested on August 15 in Wills Point, 50 miles east of Dallas, where he had been living for around 5 years. Stafford appeared to be hiding in plain sight for decades. Detectives got an arrest warrant on August 10th, but it was not until on Tuesday members of the Van Zandt County Sheriff's Department in Texas showed up at his home and took him into custody. He was arrested without incident and subsequently booked into the Van Zandt County Jail and charged with taking Susan's life. Modesto police did not give further details about what they believe happened to Susan Stafford, who is currently incarcerated in Texas and awaiting extradition to California. Exactly how the detective zeroed in on Stafford as a suspect has not been detailed. Modes of police are differing. Questions to the Stannis County District Attorney's Office, saying there was no other information they could release. Newspapers and local radio stations did reach out to the Modesto Police Department and Stannis County District Attorney to learn what led to the suspect's arrest, but did not receive a response. No information was released about how exactly Susan might have met her end, whether there is any chance of recovering her body, or what new evidence resulted in the charges against Saint in a news release. Modesto police expressed their gratitude to the Stannis County District Attorney's Office, the California Department of Justice, and various Texas authorities for their help in the long and challenging investigation. It said the collaborative efforts of these agencies have been instrumental in bringing closure to Susan Robin Bender's case, as detectives suspected foul play right from the start. They had a suspect nearly from the start, according to court records filed in Stannis County. Investigators at the time traced the green van to Stafford after he was arrested on suspicion of an unrelated burglary a month after Susan vanished. He had not been publicly named at the time. In the course of their investigation, they learned that Stafford had briefly worked with Susan's mother, Patricia Bender. At the time, she said that she believed Stafford may have formed a relationship with her daughter after calling their home phone. Court documents showed that Pat worked for Stafford for a few days back in 1985 at his security business. They also said she admitted to dating Stafford on a few. Thus, Stafford was well known to Susan. It was his rental van that Susan had been seen getting into at the bus stop. She got into his van without hesitation, according to her friend, who witnessed everything on the day of her disappearance at the bus station. A woman who lived with Stafford in the 1980s said he confessed that he strangled a female with a cord or wire and buried her near the Big Oak Flat entrance to Yosemite. He said, according to court records obtained, that he drove to a campground near the Big Oak Flat entrance to Yosemite. National Park and dug the grave less than a year after Susan disappeared. Stafford, then 38, ran for Modesto City Council. He was asked by the local newspaper about his criminal record, but told the paper in July 1985 that it was a result of him being in the wrong place at the wrong time. His arrests were listed as operating an unlicensed private investigator business and carrying a badge saying he was a private investigator. Stafford said that his campaign was focused on policies to protect children from predators. "We do not spend any time getting the people who are harassing our children." Unsurprisingly, he lost the election 5 months later, in December 1986. Stafford was convicted of setting a business on fire and pled guilty to making a false police report. He reportedly faked a kidnapping to avoid appearing in court. In 1994, he emerged once again on law enforcement's radar. He was put on an offenders register under alias Greg Tunningley for abusing a 13-year-old girl in California. New court records identify the man as Stafford. Pat revealed she always suspected Stafford was behind her daughter's disappearance. After she discovered the pair had carried on a secret relationship, Pat said, "I have known. I have known from the start when my daughter came up missing. I have known that he was the person responsible. The investigators did not listen to me." Pat added that that thought had lived with her for the past 37 years. She continued, "And it was like I was lost." People talking about their grandkids and their kids. Pat said the memories of her 15-year-old daughter were what kept her going. She remembered Susan as outgoing, funny, and just an average teenager trying to figure out where she fits. Pat never lost hope, but the quest to find her daughter was agonizing until now. She said she has had to lean on her faith. She stated, "I'm grateful. I'm glad that the system has finally decided to step up and do something instead of having me wonder if those closest to Susan hope to learn where she is in hopes of giving her the farewell they always felt she deserved." Now in the final act, her mother says the one thing she has never wrestled with is forgiveness toward Stafford. "I know this is going to sound kind of strange, but I have forgiven him for what he did to my daughter. I really have, because I would not want to carry that with me for the rest of my life." Pat said this arrest has lifted a dark cloud from her shoulders. "Now I am not looking forward to how the trial will play out. I just want Susan's body found."